Welcome to the Kings Beat podcast. I'm James Ham, Kings Insider for ESPN 1320 and the Kings Beat. Joining me, Brenden Nunes from the Kings Pulse podcast. Brenden, how are you? We're mixing it up. What's going on?
I am doing great. Went to the Stockton game last night and saw Sean there and a handful of other people. A little bit of a mess of a game, but cool to see that stadium, and things are going well for the Sacramento roster as well. So I'm feeling good.
He's feeling good. And, of course, joining us today, Fox 40s, Sean Cunningham. Sean, how are you?
I think you broke your microphone on that one. Something happened.
It's a little quiet. Yeah.
No. I'm good. I feel like, I don't want to jinx it, but I feel like we're not going to have to talk about the officials in this episode. And that could be a good thing. It'll save me from getting dragged in the comments. So let's go.
Let's go.
Yeah.
Sean does get dragged in the comments. Seriously.
Do.
I'm not sure
like
why. It is what it is, though, and Sean's a big boy. He's done this job for a long time. He's used to getting dragged in the comments.
I'm not. I'm actually. Brendan and I were talking about it. I was like, this is kind of fun. I want to make the guy who thinks I'm unlistenable into a T-shirt. I might do that. That'd be a fun one.
There it is. All right.
Yeah.
Sean's unlistenable audience. He is still listening.
It's ironic.
Okay, so hey, if you are watching on YouTube, please, if you get a chance, give us a thumbs up, subscribe, and we're growing like crazy. I ran ads last time. Yeah, I don't think I'll do that again.
Did we get paid?
Yeah, there is some money.
We have sponsors?
There is some money in the ads that I ran. No, we don't have. I used YouTube ads. And I don't want to be that intrusive. So we're going to figure that one out. But again, if you are a local business owner and would like to sponsor the Kings Beat podcast, hit us up, because I'd much rather do live reads and put your brand on our stuff here, like down and below and all that stuff, than I would run ads. But, at a certain point, we do need to monetize the podcast in some way, shape, or form. And so that's why we do things like that. Outside of that, make sure you're following the Kings Beat. Give us a premium subscription there, and you get access to Off the Record with the Kings Beat virtual happy hours. We are planning on another one. We had a conversation about another one. Me and Brenden did the other day. And we're trying to fit it in maybe the week after Thanksgiving. To be honest, I don't know when Thanksgiving is this year. It's always
Thursday.
The third Thursday.
Yeah.
It's always the third Thursday of the month, right?
24th, I believe, right?
Okay, so we might have time to squeeze one in after that, before we flip the calendar.
You mean like the after Thanksgiving, like, food coma, like in the evening hours there?
Tryptophan one. That would be fun.
That'd be funny. I think we should do a live show that. Well, no, I don't. What am I saying? We should not do a live show that day. That would be a bad idea. I'll be drunk. So let's. I don't know what I'm saying.
We'll figure something out. But we will have one coming up soon. So make sure you're a premium subscriber so you get the invite. But we are working on a pretty substantial guest that we had a conversation with, and so we won't drop that and put sort of that on them. But we'll wait until we have it secured, and then we'll run with it. Okay.
I keep hoping we can do the in-person one day. I know I keep saying it, but I'm going to manifest it. I'm going to just will it to happen.
We'll do it. What I need is we need a spot. So if anyone out there has a restaurant or a bar that they would like to invite us to, and maybe we could do a live show from one of those spots, and we'll work on that as well.
James can bartend.
Oh, I can bartend. Heck yeah.
I know you can.
And dirty martinis all day long. Yeah, dirty martinis.
Shake 'em up.
I can Cosmos. I make a delicious Cosmo. And old fashions. I can do that. I've got all kinds of things I can do here. We could just do a live one here at the house. Just invite everyone on up.
Oh, that would be a bad idea.
That would be a bad idea, because then they would know where I live, Sean.
Yeah. Well, the guard's out front. You've got security and gates and
I
boats,
do have a gate.
So you're okay.
Yeah, I could escape on a boat. That's true.
Yeah.
Okay, we've got lots to talk about. Sacramento Kings improved to 4-6 since our last podcast. They had a I don't know. What are you guys' early thoughts? Brandon, thoughts? Kings beat the Cavs. Surprise? I don't know.
Surprise isn't quite the right word because I think one of the best things about this season has been that I think the Kings have a chance to win on any given night. I don't definitely didn't go into the Cleveland game thinking that they were favored. I thought that Cleveland should be the favorites in that one by a decent margin. Came in 8-2, one of the best teams in the league at that point, on both ends of the floor, really. And you would think that they're kind of a matchup nightmare for the Kings with the lack of wing forward depth. But I thought that Sacramento's offense looked like a top 10 offense, which I think is crucial to this team kind of reaching their peak. And there's clearly a rotation that's getting worked out. And this game felt the most. Mike talked post game about him being the most comfortable in this game. And I think that that felt really obvious. Like the rotation seemed to be crisp, clean, and kind of worked out. And all the guys that were out there seemed to be getting a better and better feel and understanding of what Mike wants from them and how they all mesh with one another. So it felt like things were kind of starting to click. And this felt like another phase or step in this learning process of a largely new roster and an entirely new coaching staff.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I agree with that, Brendan, because, and I'm actually surprised I do, because it was a game where I think many of us were looking at the court going, why is De'Aaron Fox on the bench in the fourth quarter? And it kind of made sense. And you hear Mike Brown not only holding him accountable, challenging him to be a better on a two-way player. He's obviously been so impactful on the offensive end. I think he's been better defensively for sure. But in that game, a little bit of a holding accountable moment, and he rolled with that team, that closing lineup. Well, I shouldn't say closing lineup, because De'Aaron did come back with like 2.5 minutes left in the ball game. But that Davion Mitchell, Malik Monk led lineup was really, really solid defensively. I felt they put the clamps on Darius Garland. I think Darius Garland may have put some clamps on himself. But, Donovan Mitchell was going off in that game and kind of slowed down a little bit in that fourth quarter. I thought that was a huge encouraging sign for Sacramento, even with De'Aaron on the bench. And you combine that with the way Mike Brown holding himself accountable, saying that, he as Brendan mentioned, how he felt even more comfortable with the calls he was making and the adjustments he was making, and maybe sitting back a little bit and letting things breathe a little bit and feeling a little bit more comfortable with what he expects from the roster. Hopefully that doesn't go out the window when they play the Lakers on Friday, but it's there was a lot of encouraging signs there. I agree with you guys. I agree with you, Brendan, and I also think you could call that, I know some did, maybe their most complete game of the season. I felt like the Miami game here was in Sacramento was a similar type of game, but I think we're starting to see that roller coaster come down the other side now, because it's been some really steep opposition, and now you start to finally get some pedestrian teams, or some teams that might be more in line with the lower ranks of the league as opposed to the elite. And I think the Kings have really benefited from this early tough schedule, and I think they played pretty well.
Yeah, I mean, I'm looking the next 10 games. You're looking at Lakers, Warriors, Nets, Spurs, Pistons, Grizzlies, Hawks, Celtics, Suns, Pacers. I think that's the next 10. Yes, that's the next 10. And of those next 10, I mean, if you look at those games, I mean, Lakers are very beatable. The Nets are very beatable. The Spurs, the Pistons, even I'd say the Hawks on any given night are beatable. The Pacers, you're looking at least 5 games of what you would call like 50-50s or potentially winnable games. And as opposed to the first 10 games of the season where they might have had like 3 of those games that you're really looking at and saying, okay, that's winnable, that's not. And that's even before you look at the Blazers in the opener, thinking that the Blazers might be closer to what the Kings would hope to be, and all of a sudden the Blazers are coming out like as a much stronger team than expected. What are they, 8-3 on the season, 9-3, something like that. So that first 10-game schedule was really brutal. You guys brought up Mike Brown, and I think that there's a lot to take in from both the game that we watched and then the post game. And you guys brought up like I think Mike Brown was doing a teaching moment for was trying to act like there was a teaching moment for De'Aaron Fox there. I actually think it was more of a teaching moment for Davion Mitchell, and showing Davion Mitchell some love, showing Davion Mitchell some trust, and really trying to empower Davion Mitchell in the second half of that game, especially down the stretch, giving him an opportunity to defend Donovan. I didn't think that De'Aaron was horrible defensively in that game, and I was wondering the same thing everyone else was, like, why is De'Aaron Fox not on the court? But part of Mike Brown's job here is to learn his team, which was very clear that he's slowly learning and he's getting closer and he's made some mistakes. But I think it's also to like circle the guys that that you need for specific things and try to bring them along, trying to drag them along if you have to. And I think we're seeing this with, a couple of players. I think we've seen it with Malik Monk, where all of a sudden Malik Monk is flourishing in his new role. We're seeing it with Kevin Huerter, where he's flourishing. But I also think Mike Brown, it's on him to figure out how to fix Harrison Barnes, figure out how to fix Davion Mitchell. He clearly has had conversations with Chimezie Metu about who and what he needs to be if he's going to play. And, he still has a list. He still has, like, is there a moment where he comes back to Rashawn Holmes and he's got to do the same exact thing? So I think the Cavs game, like the fact that they won it was a good thing, just for win-loss record and team morale and all that. But I also think that it was, like, in a nutshell, one gigantic teaching moment for this team. And to me, that's a good thing. This team does need to grow a bunch, and they're making adjustments. Sabonis isn't fouling out of every game. And that means that not only is he keeping his hands to himself, but his teammates are also realizing that they can't let everyone get to Sabonis, or he's not going to be there to help you on the offensive end. So I think there's a lot of teaching moments going on here with Mike Brown.
Yeah, I think to your point with Davion, like we've heard Coach talk about the importance of giving guys opportunities just to keep them engaged throughout the course of the season and in practices and everything like that. And I think that we've seen him a couple times throughout the course of this year be a coach where if someone is playing well, that he's going to ride the hot hand rather than maybe go back to what his staple starters are. And he still eventually came back to Davion, but I think of that Golden State game, the first one in Golden State, where he ran with Mezzi for a long time there, and didn't go back to Sabonis until pretty late in the game. And I think it's just good for the mental of the players as well to know that if they go out there and play well, they're not just still going to get replaced by the other guy because he's ahead of you in the rotation, and that's how it's going to work every single night. Like if you go out and play well, it seems like Mike Brown is going to reward that. And I like what we've seen. I didn't really have too much of an issue with the De'Aaron thing. It was confusing at first to the point where I think most people around us in media started asking, like, is De'Aaron healthy and everything? So it definitely stood out. But I like the decision from Mike Brown. I think that if things would have gone differently, that maybe we're having a different conversation about that decision, but it ended up working out, and that's what matters in the end.
Yeah, fans were wondering the same thing, not only in the arena, on social media, but I think that's something a little good lesson there, with the way Mike Brown approaches a game and manages a game, and he really, I feel, has a really incredible feel for it. I think some of the challenges are a little bit rough, and you talk about learning moments. I think he had one there when he tried to challenge something that really wasn't reviewable, and then was ultimately tasked with the timeout, and that was something that was a bit unfortunate for Sacramento. But like he said, I mean, he's crediting a lot of people on his staff, especially for some of the adjustments that were made down the stretch in that game that they noticed that he didn't. And I think it's interesting to me. I know it's just 10 games, so as we keep saying, the sample size is small, but it seems like in every game it takes a total team effort, and like it probably shouldn't, but I hope it doesn't mean that in order for this team to play well, that it's going to take the entire team to play well. We've seen games where someone like De'Aaron Fox can carry you we've seen games where De'Aaron Fox scores a ton of points and they don't win. But it seems like when they're at their best, everyone is really clicking, and there's not really too much to nitpick or hang a oh, where were you on this game in the last win. And I feel like that's kind of a common thread in most of these wins.
Yeah, I kind of feel like when we're watching the final, I think it was right around the 9-minute mark, he pulled De'Aaron back out. I kind of feel like we're getting that moment where Mike Brown kind of might have even been saying, hey, look, show me that you can win it without him. Like, you guys, Harrison Barnes, you're having a good night. Show us that you can win it without De'Aaron being there the whole time. Like, toughen up. Let's not just rely on one guy to come in and try to be our savior. Keep playing. Please, everyone stick together. Everyone keep fighting, and let's see what happens. And you mentioned the coaching thing. I thought that was really interesting. Mike Brown said Jordi Fernandez noticed something and had them run the same play 15 consecutive times down the court. And then the Cavs made an adjustment, and what was it, Luke Laux and Davidas?
Dutch.
Dutch Gailey.
Oh, it was Dutch. You know what? The quote sheet is wrong. Because I remember pulling a quote from that and going, okay, I don't think that's what I remembered. Anyway, that they pointed out that the Cavs had made an adjustment, which opened up the backdoor cut. And I don't know if everyone remembers, but all of a sudden, Malik Monk hit the backdoor for a crazy acrobatic play. And then Harrison Barnes cut backdoor for a huge dunk. And so those two plays, again, Mike Brown was showing that it's, everyone has to be kicking in and helping out here. I think there will come a point where this team is good enough that not every game is going to be tight. I mean, we've talked about this before, but outside of the Grizzly game, which was a 15-point deficit, every single game has been within, I think it's 7 points or less this season. And so, I mean, that's 9 games that have been close. And, the Kings at 4-6, like, you don't even need to stretch to remember that the Kings lost a game because they missed 11 free throws. And the Kings had 2 games that should have at least been closer to like an overtime game with the 2 missed calls. So even if one of those games goes your way, you're a 500 team. If 2 of those games goes your way, you're 6-4, and you're like a 7 seed or a 6 seed. And so my point is that they don't feel like they're that far off. And, if the schedule does flip and they do get an opportunity here to play, again, a beat-up Lakers team on Friday night that's going to go without LeBron James. Anthony Davis walked away from shoot-around and had to go home sick, and we don't know if he'll play tonight or not. They're missing, Dennis Schroeder and like a whole bunch of players on their bench. This could be one of those games where it's ragtag, but that doesn't usually help the Kings. But my point is that they win this game, and all of a sudden they're a game under 500, and they're right there. And I think that's pretty impressive, especially with the way this season's gone.
You guys know I'm in that arena after games pretty late, and I'm looking at social media, and I'm like, oh man, I might get my first glimpse of this purple lightsaber that's up in the air above the arena. Everyone's showing it on social media.
Wait, we missed that cutout for a sec. What did you get a glimpse of?
No, everyone, I'm in the arena pretty late, and I'm seeing on social media everyone's showing pictures of the big purple lightsaber that's above Golden One Center, and I'm like, oh, I might get my first look at that tonight when I leave the building. And maybe it just goes until midnight, because when I left the building, I looked up, and it was not on. It was gone. I was like, no, the Kings still won. Keep that bitch on until the sun comes up. What are we doing? So I don't know. That would be my request, is if we could just keep that light on just a little bit longer. Come on, celebrate your win.
Yeah, I walked to the parking garage with Frankie Cardicelli, and we got down there, and I'm like, Sean's still here?
Yeah,
I don't remember seeing you. We walked out, but you weren't in the media room. You must have been back in press conference.
I hide.
Oh, you got
I have a little
spot?
cubby hole. No, I bounce around a lot. I'm basically in the press room for most of the time. So,
Okay, so Brenden, we'll start with you. Harrison Barnes looked like Harrison Barnes. What exactly happened? Because he's coming off one of the worst games ever, where he scored 0 points and played 22 minutes against Warriors. And then from the opening tip, he was just more active. He was more everything. He really just looked like the player that we've come accustomed to.
He did. I mean, I think that it has a lot to do with there seeming to be like a figured out rotation. And I think that all the guys that played, the 9 guys that played in that game against Cleveland, all have a decent understanding for the offense. And I think that Harrison is never making mistakes on offense in my mind. Like maybe sometimes I'd like him to shoot it a little bit more often than he does. But I think he's somebody that's always in the right spots on offense and not passing up great looks necessarily. And I think that just everybody else in there being on the same page and there being a good flow to their offense running through Domas really helps unlock Harrison and all the other guys around him as well when they're doing these different split cuts and just making sure guys are going in opposite directions. And I think it's just a function of the offense getting figured out and the guys that are all out there having a good feel for what is wanted from that offense. Probably a chemistry with Sabonis and the other guys that he's out there with, Trey Lyles, who we only got half of last year with, Herter and Monk that are brand new to him. So to me, I think that it's just getting more comfortable as a group. I think that there's, as much as Harrison Barnes is painted as a very consistent player, I think that I'm expecting a little bit more inconsistency throughout the course of this year when it comes to sort of offensive production and what his numbers are on a night-to-night basis. I think it's, I don't think it's as extreme as what we saw Cleveland and then Golden State, but I think that to me, there was nothing that stood out specifically with Harrison and more so just that the offense all looked like they were on the same page, and Harrison and other guys as well kind of benefited from that.
Sean?
Well, I think we had this discussion in the last podcast. First of all, is someone playing with a rapper or someone's about to electrocute themselves?
I may be
sorry,
playing with things and not realizing it was making a noise.
I don't hear it. That's funny.
Sorry. Anyway, I thought it was interesting because in the last podcast we were talking about like Harrison Barnes struggles versus Rashawn Holmes struggles, and obviously Rashawn finds himself out of the rotation for the last few games. But I thought it was interesting how Mike Brown kind of took the approach that I think most of us came up with, which was, and I know he's protecting Harrison a little bit, but it was like he's not worried about Harrison, and you shouldn't be either. He talks about all the stuff that don't show up in the box score, and the the condescending prick that I am kind of wants to go, I know that he's not showing up in the box score, and that's a problem.
There's nothing in the box score.
Yeah. So, I mean, look, I'm not worried about Harrison. I think he always tries to be the good teammate. I was sitting by a national guy during the Cleveland game, and he was kind of like, hey, where's this Harrison Barnes been? This is kind of what the Kings probably need. And he started to lean a little bit more into the egregious comment that Brenden made about possibly HB being washed. And first of all, I slapped him in the face and said, how dare you? And secondly, I said, no, it's just Harrison Barnes, man. Like, this is kind of, it hasn't been like this this bad the majority of his career, but he tends to have moments like this. And I think we've been kind of spoiled by some of the productivity that he's had, particularly over the last year and a half, and where he has been an impactful offensive player. And I think right now it's the same criticism I've always had. He needs to get more selfish in that regard, and he needs to be able to put up shots. And it's interesting to hear his teammates say the same thing. They all want to see him shoot the ball. They all have utmost belief in their vet, and Harrison is a little bit more passive in that regard. And so seeing a game like that, I thought he handled his post-game presser well and had a moment of honesty, which is, it doesn't matter how he plays as long as they're winning. He's going to keep his spirits high and all that, and that's great, and it's the right attitude to have. But he can't. I mean, I don't believe him if he tells me that didn't feel good, because clearly they were a better team with him being a scoring factor, and it doesn't have to be 20 points a game. But just like we all expect this team to flirt with a top 10 offense in this league this season, and if they're going to do that, he needs to be a productive member of the team.
Yeah, I mean, even if it's 14 points and 5.5 rebounds a game, that's totally enough. That's
Right.
productive enough for the Kings offense to work. What doesn't work is he came into the last game shooting like 16.7% from three or something. He bolstered that to 20.6, which shows you two things. Number one, he hasn't shot enough, and number two, he's not hitting enough for sure. He still is missing some pretty rough looking threes, and that's the thing. It's not, for me, it's not that I have these lofty expectations of who Harrison Barnes should
Right.
be or can be or anything else. I'm watching him and it's like it doesn't feel like the same player. And then all of a sudden I watch him in that game, and holy cow, he was good defensively. I mean, he was outlengthed and outsized for sure, but I thought him against Evan Mobley was stunning. Like there were plenty of stops, and sometimes he shot over the top of him, or he did something athletic. But at the same time, I thought, okay, if this is a guy that is supposed to be here, that you expect, then this makes a ton of sense. And it's just not been the player he's been. So I think alarm bells have been rung here for sure, but you also have to remember this is 10 games into the season, and we can look back now and say of the first 10 games, Harrison Barnes had probably 3 really good games or 3 quality games, and then 7 that you're like, what exactly is happening? I think it's the extreme that we're seeing, especially the 3-point percentage that's always been at 38, 39, 40%. And to see it like really fall off, it's jarring. It's jarring to see a player who isn't playing anywhere near what you're accustomed to seeing. So I get it. But I also know that like sometimes patience is needed, and people just don't want to hear that word in Sacramento, if that makes sense.
Of those 7, it's like, I'm okay if sometimes I'm okay with the occasional game where he's a negative impact. You don't want it to look like that, but I think the games I'm more frustrated by are the ones where it's like, Harrison Barnes played tonight.
It's the milk
where you
it's the
don't
milk
notice
carton
him.
games. Yeah.
Yeah, like where'd he go?
Yeah, it's like someone sent out a search party. Barnes has gone missing. No, I mean, that's the problem. I mean, how many games this season? And it's not even hard to look at to find them. I mean, there are 5 games this season where he scored in single digits, and like in those games, sure, he had 8 rebounds and 7 rebounds one time, but against Golden State the first time, 4 points and 2 rebounds. The 2 games against Golden State, he's 0 points and 3 rebounds and 4 points and 2 rebounds. That's jarring. Like that's just a complete milk carton game. And so, hopefully we don't see more of that. And I don't know. I mean, of course, players have ebbs and flows in the season, highs and lows. But his can't be so dramatic. Does that make sense, Brendan?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, they can't be, and part of the reason they can't be is because the Kings not having great wing and forward depth. But I thought my favorite takeaway from the post game after Charlotte was Coach talking about Trey Lyles. And Trey Lyles has been great for the Kings throughout the course of this year. He's the first player that comes off the bench, usually for one of HB or Keegan, and then those guys get staggered in with the second unit a little bit down the line. But I thought the Trey Lyles thing was so encouraging to me because Coach said post game that one of the fun things is coming from a different team, you can tell these players what his defensive scouting report was on them when he was with Golden State. And he said that he told Trey Lyles that it was to close out soft every time because we know you want to pump fake and put the ball on the floor. And Coach said, you're way too good of a shooter to do that. And I think the quote was, let that MF fly. And I think that's exactly what I've always wanted to see from Trey Lyles on the offensive end, is that like these slow pump fakes that maybe kill the rhythm of an offense. And Lyles, you saw it out there against Cleveland. Like he was confident and quick with his 3-point jumper. And I think the reason it's so encouraging to me is that it's been working well for Trey Lyles to be making quick decisions, and a Sacramento coach optimizing a player is just not exactly what I'm accustomed to. More accustomed to Chimezie Metu being asked to put up X amount of threes because they just need that sort of spacing. Or Buddy Hield, you're going to go out and guard Devin Booker tonight. Maybe we don't have better options, but like I feel like more often than not, it had been on the other side where guys were maybe being asked to do what some of their weaknesses were and not put in the best positions to succeed all too often. And I feel like this is our first real example of Coach Brown optimizing a player and bringing the best out of them.
Yeah, I want to point this out because like I've been one that has called out when Trey Lyles I think has had a great game. I call it out. He's usually one of my 6 takeaways because I think he's had impactful games. You know, he had the game against Miami where he came in and was huge and then had the big block. The next game against Charlotte, he had 2 blocks and both of them I think came down the stretch where he showed up big. But I'm also going to point out that, like this last game, Trey Lyles had 16. The game before that, he had 2. The game before that, he had 15. The game before that, he had 3. And so, like, I feel like we want to give, like Trey Lyles his props. But at the same time, his season looks very similar to Harrison Barnes' season, where some games he's very impactful and others he's not. Now, the difference is that one of them's a starter and one of them's not. But I was watching the Cleveland game like with you guys, and I look up and I'm like, Trey Lyles has 13 points? When the hell did that happen? Like, it was the most quiet 13, and then he got up to 16. He had another late 3, but by that point I had realized he was already pushing up and getting, he's already above double figures. And then I looked at the game that Malik Monk had, and I thought that was like the noisiest 15 points I'd seen in a long time. Like, you just think back, he had the huge 3-pointers that were like changed momentum. He had that circus layup. He had the alley-oop. You're like, oh, I fully remember Malik Monk in that game. And he finishes with less points than Trey Lyles, who I don't even remember on the floor half the time. And I think that that's one of those interesting things where perspective plays so much into how we watch a game. And sometimes
how
guys
you watching? No, I'm kidding.
Well, yeah, but like really, like when you're watching, like, oh man, that was a great game. Davion Mitchell had one of his best games. Did Davion hardly scored, and that doesn't matter scoring or not. But like, I just think it's interesting how we sort of, as people who watch the NBA, we tend to value certain things that and not others, or certain things seem to catch your eye as opposed to others, and it's the way the league has marketed itself. But it's weird to see a game like that where one guy realistically had an incredibly impactful game and didn't show up, you didn't even really notice it, and another guy had a little bit less impactful as far as numbers, but you noticed it all day long.
Well, and I think Davion Mitchell's almost the poster child for that, especially on this team, because there's people who will get frustrated he doesn't score more. It's like, man, do you look at what else he's providing, especially for a team that sorely needs it? Like, this guy is incredible. He really is, especially for as undersized as he is. I find myself just focusing on him so often during a game, and I think he has a really good effect, not only with others he plays with, but I was thoroughly entertained, not only in that game, but the comeback game where Fox goes out. Was that at Miami? No, help me out. That was the Miami game.
At Charlotte, excuse me. And then the Miami game is where he started and was quiet.
Yeah, and so that Charlotte game, now all he did in that game was score. He didn't score in this Cleveland game, but to me he had just as similar of an impact. I mean, the way they pushed the ball, the way they frustrated the opponents, the way they got into them, the way the physicality was. I thought Domantas Sabonis shared, it was Domantas Sabonis after the game who shared how his former teammate Karis LeVert was like, damn, you guys are just running. Like, it's clearly the recipe for a team that's big and has all these imposing players to just run them off the floor as you should. And it's something we expect from this Kings team, and it had really waned over the past few years with Luke Walton. You really want to see this team run, and I think everyone knows that that's going to be the secret to their success offensively. But everyone knew that they had strides to make defensively, so they're finally doing that. And to your point, James, of just players, I know there's so many fans that just look at box scores and it's like, all right, let me look at the points, look at the rebounds, how these guys shoot. It's so much bigger than that. And that's unfortunately when you're comparing it to somebody like Harrison Barnes, who has, massively struggled defensively, and that's why you really want to give him his flowers after a game like he had the other night in the win over Cleveland, because he was impact. He was impacting the box score offensively, but defensively, as you mentioned earlier, was really, really good. So, yeah, and as far as Trey Lyles goes, man, I think he's a vet. I mean, look, any positive impact from him is good, and they put him in a situation where he's probably not your ideal. I mean, he's probably far from it, but he's through 10 games, he's playing the part. Who knows if it can sustain, but so far so good. I think he's been really good in these games. It's undeniable, and he's come in with the right attitude and the right mindset, because he may not be a Sacramento King for the duration of the season, but he's prepared himself very well to fit in a lot of different systems. And I feel like the way he's adapting to Mike Brown's system, coming in shape, coming in differently than what you've seen in the past, and really trying to rely on a role that they really need, is so far so good through the first 10 games, and hopefully they can sustain that.
Yeah, I should have pulled the video from this and dropped it in, but I did not. But Davion Mitchell said, coming into a new coach, they've got a new system. Everybody is trying to find their roles, or I'm trying to find that niche, or what's my role here. I think I'm learning every game. I think I'm getting better every game. That's what he said in postgame from the locker room. And I specifically had asked him if he was still searching for his role, and how difficult has it been? Because, I mean, people forget it. Like Davion Mitchell, I think he played his 86th game yesterday. And he's had 3 head coaches. Like, that's a lot. That's 3 different people with 3 different ideas of who and what he can be, that are trying to do something different. And 3 different coaches that are also at the same time trying to figure out De'Aaron Fox and how he works, and trying to figure out like where Malik Monk versus Tyrese Halliburton or Buddy Hield, or like you forget that there's all these other variables, Justin Holiday or Dante DiVincenzo. Like Davion Mitchell hasn't just played for 3 coaches. Look at how many people he's played with. I mean, Kevin Huerter, you can throw Kevin Huerter in there as well. Like just in the backcourt, his fellow backcourt mates, he's at like 7 or 8 or 9 different players he's already played with in 2 years. And it's not even 2 years. It's like 86 games. That to me, it's really, really hard to expect consistency from a player when you have provided him nothing but inconsistency as far as like his structure and his system around him. So I hope that he learns quickly, and that he takes something from a game like this where he goes 3 of 6 from the field, but showed major growth. Like he does not have to be an offensive weapon. He needs to hit open shots. He doesn't have to be an offensive weapon in order for this team to be impactful. And I kind of feel like he's in that Chimezie Metu like vein. If he can figure out what Chimezie's starting to figure out, that if there's a moment for me to get my shot, I can get my shot. But realistically, I need to play within the flow, and I need to make good decisions. He even had a travel where he didn't pull a 3 in the game the other night. And to me, that was a sign of growth, because even though he was open, he's just not hitting them. And he hits 26% for his career or whatever. That's not a good shot. So I would have rather seen him, again, attack the paint and get someone else who's a better 3-point shooter a shot, or get a big a shot, or get to the basket and get a high percentage shot. But I think it's something that some of these young players are learning in Mike Brown's system right now. And that's a big point of development. That's huge for this group. If a guy like Davion, a guy like Chimezie, even a guy like Trey can figure out how he's going to fit in here and be productive and help this team win.
And I think a big key to that is communication. Like coach obviously needs to learn his players and try to define those roles best he can, and then communicate that to the players. And if there's a disagreement in somebody feels like they want to be able to take more shots, then that needs to be able to be a conversation that's had. And Mike strikes me as a guy that's willing to have those conversations. And I think if guys can get on the same page with the coaching staff and not only understand their role, but be accepting of it and understand why they're asked to do what they're do, then I think that this team has a chance to be pretty decent on the offensive end, and certain guys will pitch in on defense as well, specifically Davion.
Yeah, Sean, like you've covered like parts of Mike Brown's career for years, and I think it's something that you've brought up a couple of times. It's that Mike Brown has coached stars, and in coaching stars, I think the one good thing about having a coach that has coached stars is that just because you coach stars, that doesn't mean that you leave the other 14 guys on the roster out in the cold. You have to actually really coach the other guys because they need to figure out how to support that star. And I don't think he really has, clearly he doesn't have LeBron James on this team. And De'Aaron Fox is playing really well, but he's not LeBron James. And whether you want to call him an all-star level player or a star level player or not, I mean, that's debatable. The numbers support that he's a really good basketball player either way. I'd say the same thing about Sabonis. But I still think that Mike Brown's mentality is really good for this group because even if he is coaching like a bunch of role players, he's had to do that many times where he has to ask guys to do something that maybe they're not comfortable doing, and he has to have buy-in in order to get that to happen.
Well, and you hit on it. It's buy-in. And of those superstars, you're talking about generational superstars who are like their own coach on the floor. LeBron James, Kobe Bryant. And I wonder, what would this look like? Could Mike Brown coach Luka Doncic? I don't think so. Like, I don't think he'd be the right coach for him. Luka is one of those type of players that fit that mold and has that. He needs not to be left alone necessarily, but you have to build around him the right way. But he's a dominating personality, right? He's a dominating, I don't mean off the court, I mean on the court, dominating type of personality. Whereas if you're tinkering and you're OCD and you have all this attention to detail, you're going to lose a guy like that. And we've seen that. We've seen that happen with not only LeBron and Kobe, but that's why I feel like Mike Brown is such a great fit for this team in this moment, because it's exactly what they need. They need the discipline. They need the structure. They need someone to not only teach them basketball, but hold them accountable at the same time. That the better your team gets will be as a result of something like that. Now, if you have a superstar talent that is like one of those players, typically the team tends to follow their lead more so, and that can fly in the face of discipline, structure, all that kind of stuff. So I feel like this team right now, the biggest leader on their team is Mike Brown. Beyond that, I think it's still kind of like from a play-in standpoint, from a player standpoint, I think it's going to be a wait and see. I think you're going to rely on your veterans for sure. I think this is a Domantas Sabonis kind of led team for the most part. And I feel like they've got great pieces around it, but they all funnel towards Mike Brown. And it's just such a great fit for Sacramento right now and for what they're hoping and aspiring to be. Let's see what this looks like 5 years from now, or even really a year from now. I mean, we can't get too far along when it comes to Kings head coaches, but I think this is in for a long haul right here, barring something completely unforeseen. But the one undeniable thing is like Mike Brown has had such a positive impact on this team, and I think the fan base for sure has taken notice. I think they've really liked not only what Mike Brown brings, but the personality. I know, James, you've alluded to just how fun he is, how
he's fun,
kind of folksy, but it's a fun mix. Like you think of just past Kings head coaches, right? Like Michael Malone is someone I hold very, very high, and from a structure and discipline standpoint, he's probably the tops of Kings coaches since Adelman. But from a personality standpoint, he can be a little bit of a rough personality. Paul Westphal might be one of the most folksy, lovable guys you've ever met in a coaching standpoint, but from a X's and O's head coach discipline, he might be one of the worst. And so Mike Brown just really has one of those really good fits for right now for this team. And I feel like the folksiness, the personality, it's kind of funny. He doesn't really have much of a filter. I think he says what he means. I don't think he holds back on anything. He kind of wears everything right there. Like he's kind of an open book in that regard. And again, I think that's going to do a lot of good for this team. You don't need somebody that skirts the issue. Like Dave Yeager was, I think he thought he was better than what he was when it came to answering a question by not answering a question. And then Luke Walton would answer a question almost just like he'd answer a direct question. That's one of the things we loved about Luke Walton. Mike Brown is a lot in the Luke Walton camp where it's like if you ask a question, he's going to not only answer it, but tell you a story and have about 2 tangents that will go along with it before really answering it. So coaches are different, man. And I just think, it's kind of affirming through 10 games what we've seen out of this training camp and some of the beliefs that at least I had coming in where it's like, I think he's the right coach for the moment.
I'm going to say this too, and I'll let Brenden jump in, so I'll make it quick. But I think one of the biggest things is that we keep saying it could be a Sabonis team, it could be a Mike Brown team. I think that the amount of buy-in from your star player, which this team, their star player is De'Aaron Fox, the amount of buy-in from him is exactly what's helping make this thing work. Because that guy is 100% bought into this process with Mike Brown. And so I know it's like we want to skirt the subject of whether Fox is a leader or not. I'm going to say that he is a leader. He's a leader on the court. He's a guy who's put this team on his back multiple times already this season. But he's also a guy who sensed a game was going a different way and maybe he didn't need to be the star and took a secondary role and set everybody up. He, even in the comeback during the against the Warriors, he stepped on the court while a bunch of young guys are having a run and getting the game back, in sort of in their favor. And he didn't step in and try to take over. He stepped in and tried to be part of the success. And I think Fox's buy-in is as much as that's a huge victory for Mike Brown, and it's helping this process work out. But I also think that, like, if he didn't have that, this team would be where it is, like, every other season. Where, like, even if they are close, it still feels like, okay, this is just a matter of time before it breaks down. I'm kind of the opinion it's just a matter of time before the Kings crush somebody, before they put up a 25-point win. And you're just waiting for it. You're like, I even asked Mike Brown, like, if you had hair, you would be pulling your hair out. Every single game is like cardiac Kings, like whether you win or you lose. But, I mean, the Kings could be on a 5 or 6 game winning streak right now. If they didn't have those 2 calls go the opposite way, maybe they could have won those games. But you're seeing those are still 3-point losses in the NBA. Like, every single game feels like it's going down to the stretch. There's an overtime game. There's 3-point games. There's, like, everything feels tight. And again, I think a lot of it comes down to the buy-in that we're seeing from this team and the buy-in we're seeing from Fox. That was not short, but go ahead, Brenden.
No, you're good. You definitely see it from Fox. I think Fox was on NBA Today earlier this morning and talking about kind of what Mike has done for him. And the 2 keys are, obviously the effort that he's had on the defensive end. And I think he's been pretty impressive in that regard. And De'Aaron has never been much of a vocal leader from what we've seen. But I think just the way that he is locking in and engaging on the defensive end while still having all that offensive responsibility speaks for itself, that nobody's kind of allowed to take that end of the floor off. And then the other thing that De'Aaron mentioned was how vocal he has been, especially since Domas was acquired last year. And I think he mentioned at the end of last year that had a bit to do with Tyrese leaving, and Tyrese was kind of the vocal leader, so he wanted to step a little bit up into that role. But I think that that's kind of just echoing a lot of what Mike Brown is saying in the first place. And I think another big aspect of it is not only are the top guys clearly bought in, there's not really anybody on the roster in my mind that's playing significant minutes that you look at and like are questioning their buy-in. And I feel like the last couple of years, the Kings had that. It kind of feels, I think there's moments where maybe I've been a little bit unsure about certain players' buy-ins here and there. But I think as the year has gone along, like that's not a question that I'm super focused on or worried about like it was same ways in years prior. So I think it does start at the top with Mike Brown, De'Aaron, and Sabonis, but I think it trickles all the way down.
Yeah, and so I think this leads to like the other question. Like, we talk about leadership, we talk about all these things, but it feels like the one guy on this team that's bringing something completely different and like a huge positive both on the court but also off the court is Malik Monk. And like I knew Malik Monk could score, but like as of right now, I saw something, and I haven't actually looked it up, which I should actually look it up before I say this. But Malik Monk leads the Kings in assist percentage, which when you talk about a team that has two, realistic, like high level assist guys in Domas and De'Aaron. Yeah, so Domas is at 29.1% in his assist percentage. De'Aaron Fox is just behind him at 28.7. And I know some people are like, man, Fox needs to pass more. No, this team is one of the better passing teams in the league. Everything's working. Just let it happen, like this organic feel that's happening. But Malik Monk is at 31.1. That is like a really, really good NBA starting point guard assist percentage. And so he's not just providing this crazy spark as an offensive weapon, which again, he's been very good offensively. He's had some off games early on, but we're kind of seeing him grow and fill into his role. He's averaging 12.2 points. He's averaging 4.4 assists, and he's only playing like 21.6 minutes. But I think we're going to see Malik Monk continue to take on a bigger and bigger role with this team. And then off the court, he's a prankster, and he's a guy that brings like this joy and levity to the Kings that I think is being missed a little bit. And so, Sean, what are your thoughts? What the early sort of representation from Malik Monk?
Oh man, he's been fun. He's been fun, and I think I'm totally. I've had this thought, but I've seen some other fans mention it. I think he should never get rid of the Band-Aid. I
Band-Aid
love
Malik.
Band-Aid Malik. Band-Aid leak. Just yeah. He even wore it on I saw some team photos of them about to get on a plane for LA yesterday, and he's still wearing. He had this big green one. It's almost like Nelly in a way. But I just think he's got a whole vibe to him, man. Like you mentioned, James, like the flair for the moment. I mean, yeah, that crazy lob from Domas that turns into this acrobatic reverse lay-in, and then when he makes that defensive stop and he's running all the way up court and he kind of slows down, but Mike Brown like pushes him into the corner and then he gets the three. Just a flair for the dramatic. He's been so good. The playmaking, I think, speaks for itself. I think there's a lot of people that didn't realize what a playmaker he had been or her can be. I really enjoy him, what he's been defensively. I know even when he struggled earlier in the not only training camp, or excuse me, not only in preseason, but maybe the first handful of games of the season, I thought he still was trying to impact the game, especially from a defensive standpoint and a playmaking standpoint. Maybe the shot wasn't falling. Now it just seems like everything's kind of coming together. He clearly has a role, and I think that road trip where they go 2-2, he was not only so huge for. I thought the Warriors game he was big, even though they dropped that one. But I thought he had a nice, kind of a nice rotation moment with not only with Terrence Davis and Chimezie Metu and Davion. Like that unit there really was impactful. You kind of saw it again the other night against Cleveland. And they're physical. Like they can handle physicality. They're not, especially that group together. They're not a team that, historically you see Kings get kind of punched first and then they kind of wilt a little bit. They kind of have a swagger to them, and they can sustain some physicality. So I like him that way. I kind of want to see him play alongside De'Aaron a little bit more. We haven't seen a ton of that. Especially like you can have the three of them where it's Herter, Monk, and Fox on the floor at the same time. So still a lot of curiosity surrounding him, but I just think he's a breath of fresh air. If I could talk to him after every single game and practice, sign me up. I'm in.
Yeah, he's fun.
He's very fun, and excuse me, the off-court value is definitely there, as you kind of talked about. And Domas talked about that a little bit post game. Not only the chemistry in their 2-man game, but it's just somebody that he enjoys being around. And I think it's easy to see why people would enjoy being around Malik. I mean, as you guys said, like, we enjoy just covering Malik. So I'm sure being one of his teammates is and extremely enjoyable as well. And offensively, like, he's such a complete player, man. Like, he's obviously a really good 3-point shooter. He can create off the bounce for himself. The passing that James mentioned, leading the team in assist percentage, is phenomenal. And I think that he's great at getting to the rim as well. Obviously, he's got hops to him and the ability to put the ball on the floor and get there as well. So I think he's extremely versatile on offense. Mike Brown also shared that they have their own defensive metric, and I think that Malik Monk actually ended up at the top of their defensive metric for the month, which I don't know how to take that. Malik is definitely not their best defender, but point being, Malik has been solid on the defensive end as well, which is an area that I think a lot of people would have expected him to have some shortcomings. And I think that those lineups, like Sean's talking about, I think we're seeing Fox and Malik play together a little bit more as of recently, and I'd like to see that more. Because if you can roll out a lineup with De'Aaron Fox, Malik Monk, Kevin Huerter, one of HB, or Keegan Murray and Domantas Sabonis, like, your offense should be just right at the top of the league right there.
Yeah, they're right at the cusp of being a top 10 offense, but if you look, they're number 12 as of right now. But if you look at, like, their effective field goal percentage, they're, I think, fourth. You look at their true shooting, they're third. This team is really, really starting to show that they're a high-end offensive club. The defense is, again, when you're going to score this much, when you're going to be up-tempo and all that stuff, you're going to have some issues keeping up with with your defensive metrics. But I also think that when they need a stop, they are showing here and there that they can't get a stop unless it's against Steph Curry, where they have not been able to show that they can get a stop at all. But outside of that, like, the rest of the guys, I think it's interesting. We always see a team, like, what is a coach? What is their theory? Do they let one guy try to beat you single-handedly and take away everything else? Or do they try to slow the one guy and hope that someone else doesn't pop up and beat you? And so far, it kind of feels like Mike Brown is a little bit of that. He will allow one guy to, like, have whatever he's going to do and leave him man on man, even if he gets hot, and then just try to stop everyone else. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. I think with Donovan, they were able to slow him down near the end of the game. When it came to Steph, there's nothing they could do. Once he got hot, he just kept stacking on the points till finished with like 47. So I think that's been, like, one of the ways in which we've seen this team sort of take a little bit of a step back is on the defensive end, but they're also still trying to find themselves. And I like the fact that they've made adjustments. I like the fact that, again, I was just looking at, on Basketball Reference, I didn't look at the NBA.com stats for Malik Monk, but he's like a 128 offensive rating and a 117 defensive rating. And then, I'll say this too. Sean gets called out in the comments section all the time, but someone would, like, went at me and Brenden. Well, sometimes. All the time.
I'm sorry.
All the time. Sean gets called out. But someone had called me and Brenden out for not saying anything negative about Kevin Huerter's defense, and that everyone in the league is just picking on Kevin Huerter. Like, man, Kevin Huerter has a 116.5 offensive rating and a 113.4 defensive rating. He's a plus 3.1 on a team that is a negative. Like, the Kings' defensive woes, like, they are not associated with Kevin Huerter.
No. And here's the thing, like, it's just fun because, I mean, I guess you can talk about this. We're just coming off election day, and people can have, completely different viewpoints of the same movie or the same whatever. Like, people watching the same game and all have different different viewpoints of what they're witnessing. Brenden mentioned that I saw him in Stockton last night, and we were talking about just some of the officiating lately, and obviously it's not something we love to harp on, but I kind of alluded to the fact that it's like, bad teams are the ones that typically love to, harp on officiating, and I think I equated a lot to watching a lot of fighting, but be it boxing or UFC, and it's like, if you have to leave it to the judge's scorecard, for them to decide the game, when ultimately, like if it comes down to one of those type of plays and you just got screwed by the refs, and again, there's no excuse for that, but it's just a tough pill to swallow after you see the way that some of these games have gone. But at the same time, it's like, well, take care of business earlier on, and hopefully it doesn't come down to one of those moments, because you don't want to leave it into the officials' hands to have to make a call late or expect them to do their job. So it's tough, man. I get it, but it's just funny, man. Like you have people who look at officiating differently, especially when it comes down to the end of the game like that. And you can look at someone like Kevin Huerter, who, in my opinion, has been pretty solid defensively. He's been a solid defender throughout his time with Atlanta. Maybe you look at him in street clothes and go, yeah, that guy's probably not probably one of the lower end of the defenders on his team, based on the way he looks with the headband and the hair and his background, his ethnic background. Maybe that maybe he's going to stick out like a sore thumb in this league. But no, man, he's a pretty gritty player, man. He's a guy that I think really brings it defensively, and oftentimes gets a pretty top tier defensive assignment too. So I'm Kevin Huerter ain't the problem.
No, there's been moments, but overall, like again, like everyone on this team has had.
Yeah, like against Steph Curry, like who's like unguardable. Like, show me the book on defending Steph, getting into him, guy. Like, you don't want to put him. Mike Brown said it best. You don't want him shooting threes, and you don't want him shooting free throws. So, like, if you everywhere else, like, you're fine with. That's how you defend Steph Curry.
I will say I think that Huerter has been a little bit. He's had more moments of struggling on defense than I expected. I thought that he was pretty solid from what I watched in Atlanta, and obviously, like, being alongside Trey, he got a lot of big responsibilities, and we're seeing some of that transfer over to Sacramento here as well. So just in fairness, I do think that there's been a handful of moments where I would have liked more from him on the defensive end, but he's far from the only person on the team that's been like that. I thought that Golden State game was really bad, but to your point, it's Steph Curry. But it does stand out when he's covering Draymond, as Steph is motioning at Draymond, hey, get over here, because that's the guy I want to pick on. So I think that Huerter has had his moments of maybe I would have liked more defensively, but his offensive production is phenomenal, and he also has moments where he is doing just fine on the defensive end, and he's far from the only one with struggles. So I think that that'll all get worked out.
Bro, it wasn't even just Steph Curry. It was a pissed off Steph Curry. That was
right.
That was like, you made Hulk mad, and he's not even Hulk. Like, he's just this little guy. Like, that dude was so pissed off, and you could see him. Like, I posted a video of just the guy had his swagger going the entire game. He's leading them back from this deficit, and they're having to play catch up. And he was really feeling himself. That was Steph being Steph, and that was just a vintage performance.
Yeah, absolutely was. And to the point James made earlier, like, it seemed like they were kind of trying to take everybody else out of the game, and it looks like that's a little bit of what we saw in Cleveland, and that'll end up getting cleaned up as the year goes along. But at very least, like last year, or at least with Jaeger, the offense was good, the defense was bad. With Walton and trying to fix the half-court offense, it became, well, the offense got bad as well, and the defense didn't get any better. At very least, right now, there's a strength when there really was not one last year.
No, I agree.
Well said, yeah.
And I'll also say, too, like, look, this team is showing signs of improvement on the defensive end, and while the metrics aren't better, like, we've seen the weird things like the defended three-point shots that are just going in by the opponent. Like, whether they're defended or, whether the Kings are playing good defense or not, guys are hitting shots. We've seen a little bit of that take a step back. But I also say one of the biggest things I'll point to is that Sabonis stopped picking up all the fouls. Like, through the first 6 games, he fouled out 3 times. He hasn't been in foul trouble the last 4 games. And I think it's a lot because his teammates aren't allowing players to go at him. They're stepping in. They're actually rotating better. We're seeing moments where this Kings team is just all over the floor defensively and looking really solid defensively. It's like a work in progress. Like, we keep saying this, and I think that was, like, again, the most true and honest moment by Mike Brown, where he really took it on himself too. He said, look, we haven't, like, as a team, we weren't great in the first couple of games of the season, but also as a coach, I wasn't great. I made mistakes, and like I'll own those mistakes and say, look, I didn't know my team well enough. And he made the statement that, until you see them in the daylight of, is that what he said? Like, come out of the darkness and into the daylight of like a regular game, you really don't know how your rotations are going to work. You don't know how players are going to play. And then you have to wait until you get 10 games or 5 games or 20 games into a season before you can really start to see marked change and see players figure things out. And again, I would come back to that as the biggest thing with what we're seeing right now is that this Kings team is starting to grow. We're starting to see moments. Mike Brown keeps talking about like this upward arc, but you can actually see an upward arc. They're actually competing in every game. They're fighting. They're doing all the things that, we kind of expect. We kind of hoped when we looked at the start of this season, but it's just going to take a little while to get there. And I made this point when I was writing yesterday. Like, there is no perfect formula for this. We have every team is different. Every player is a different variable. The schedule is a variable that you're not looking at. Like the history of a player and a team. Like, there's so many different things when you're looking at a team that for some people they're like, well, how come the Utah Jazz are like 10-2 or 11-3 or whatever they are, and the Kings can't figure it out? But that's a new coach. They traded away their 2 best players, their 3 best players probably if you count Bogdanovich. If you go back to Joe Ingles leaving, that whole team is different. They lost one of the best coaches in the league, in my opinion, in Quinn Snyder. How is it that they're winning and the Kings aren't? And the answer is there is no answer for that. It's every formula is different. Every pot takes longer, whatever it is. Like, if you're making chili, sometimes it takes longer for the things to get together and blend together. Sometimes it doesn't. You don't know until you test it out and sit there and work with it. And so I really do believe that, like, this team, we're starting to see them sort of come to that moment where if you can get a Davion to come back and figure it out, if you can get a Harrison Barnes to figure it out, now you're starting to see where this team could have real success, more sustainable success in at least this season, and they could build something for season to go forward with.
Yeah, that upward trend, James. Like, I remember when we were talking about 0-4, and I'd hear some people kind of smirk and be like, "Oh, same old Kings." And I'm like, man, I thought I was the asshole on the I can be pretty. I am, but I can be pretty. But it's like, no, man. If you can't see that they're a more fun brand of basketball, they're playing some upper echelon talent. Like, you got to factor that in. You talked about just the little the thematics through different games that come into play. Like, the same thing can be said with the Cavs. Like, the Cavs, I think, are an elite team in the league. Okay,
next year I think they're a team that could win the East. Maybe this year, but next year, like, holy cow.
They're not looking beyond this year, but I mean, for sure. And then you look at, like, okay, how are they thinking right now? What are the Cavs Beat podcast saying? They're going, well, the Cavs, they caught a Kings team desperate for a win and coming off a frustrating loss, and the Warriors. And for the Cavs, it was the last game on their road trip. So you typically, teams on the last game of road trip don't look very good. So there's nuance to everything. It's just worth pointing out that it's like just it's 10 games, and it's you don't get too high or too low. I think a lot of people get real caught up in the minutia of the way the game plays out, and it's early. And yes, early basketball is very consequential for a team like the Kings, who hope to be in a play-in or low-end playoff situation. We get that, but and we've talked about the necessity to start off strong. You can still start off strong. Your first 25 games is not what your first 10 games is. So that will ultimately decide whether or not you start off strong or not. But 0-4, I was like, yeah, man, find the wins. like find the wins. It's tough to do, and you're going up against great upper echelon talent. I said it earlier, I think this team is going to benefit from the type of start that they've had now that you start to get some of those lower tier teams or middle of the road teams as opposed to these championship contending teams. I think you've really benefited from that. It's kind of like in football, especially in high school football, you see it a lot. But if you're a high school football team out there, you want to have a schedule where you're going up against elite competition, because even if you go for the world in those first 4 games, when you get into league play, if you dominate your league and take care of everything, you're going to be fine. It's how did you measure up against those elite teams, and it's like, okay, well, you're going up against one of these higher ranked teams, no doubt. But if you can score points and make it a competitive ball game, that'll ultimately be a factor when they try to rank you for the playoffs if you go that far. So college is a lot of the same of that as well. So I just think this team is benefiting from some of that opposition, and I think you can see it. And I think this team knows that. That's why they're not getting too high or too low. And you mentioned the Cavs game, James. I'm wondering if the Warriors game goes a different way. Let's say they beat the Warriors. Sometimes complacency can come after a big win, and you go into that Cavs game, maybe it's a different result. I think they came out and played the way they did as a result of the frustrations from that Warrior game.
Well, and before Brenden finishes up here, I'll point out too, the first game after a long road trip usually doesn't go that well, and that's what the Kings were. While the the Cavs were on their last game of a road trip, the Kings were on their first game back after a 4-game road trip, their first 4-game road trip of the year. Brenden, thoughts?
I just think the important thing now is we're seeing them compete well against good teams, is that you have to beat the teams that you should be beating. I think that's.
I did say it. What a dick.
It's not going to happen. It's not going to happen every single game. Sometimes, basketball, any team can win on any given night. Shots fall, shots don't. But I think it's really important that after this Cleveland game, the Lakers look horrible. The Lakers genuinely look like one of the best teams in the league. And without LeBron James, questionable Anthony Davis, the Kings need to come into tonight and get that win against the Lakers. And I think that we are seeing this positive momentum and trending upwards that coach is talking about. And it's good to see that result in wins. But that needs to continue, and you got to take care of business in these other games where the opponent maybe isn't the caliber of what they've been used to these first 10.
What do you expect from Russell Westbrook tonight?
I think Russell Westbrook is pretty okay still, to be honest.
I know. That was you have no LeBron, no AD, probably no AD. What do you do? I mean he's going to run the show, right?
The list.
Yeah, and then he's just going to dish it out to guys that can't make open threes. It'll be great.
Yeah, well, that and he's involved in the guys that can't make open threes. Anthony Davis was already probable low back tightness, but now it looks like he has an illness. Lonnie Walker was questionable with a non-COVID related illness. Thomas Bryant has a left UCL repair, and Dennis Schroeder is out with the UCL repair. Scottie Pippen Jr. and Cole Swider are both on G League assignment. This Lakers team is going to be shorthanded. This is a game.
These are the teams. This is the ones that always make me nervous, to be honest.
But this is a game that the Kings were looking for, where go out there and throttle somebody. Show that you've got that. Because there's one thing to say that you can get through a Cavs game and you can figure out a way to beat the Heat. Go show that you can throttle someone and put that in the fear in the back of people's mind too. That you can go out there and drop someone by 30 points and make them feel as bad as you have in certain games in the last couple of years.
These are those games where they make you nervous because someone's going to have a career high and they're playing shorthanded, and then when the Kings lose to a team like this is what makes the fan base beat their head into a wall. They hate games like this. So this needs to be a game where you take care of business for sure.
Okay, we're going to finish up with the business of basketball.
Look at your eyes when you do that. Go back and watch. It is so amusing.
I know what I do.
I know what I do.
There's something funny that's happened here in the last week, and that is that the Kings have gone on an all-out offensive against the NBA officials, and
here we go.
Well, no. It's not that. It's that Mike Brown is literally stepped to the podium and unloaded twice, and he was respectful in a way. Kevin Huerter has gone out and said stuff multiple times. Like if De'Aaron Fox said something, like it feels like the Kings have like made their case. But here we are like 4 days later and they haven't been fined. Are you guys surprised that, I mean, I guess what you have to do now is flip someone off, because we saw that today where I think Nikola Vucevic got fined for flipping a fan off or something. But
That's different.
is there also should we read anything into this that Joe Dumars, former Kings front office member Joe Dumars, is one of the guys that is making the decision on who gets fined and who doesn't? Because I'm shocked. I thought that at this point, like, there would be a Kings GoFundMe account to pay for all these fines.
Oh, stop.
No, I mean, because there was
tons of
chatter.
money.
There was chatter about that they were gonna start one, but there isn't any. Like, that to me, it seems a little strange, because someone who's covered the league as long as I have, and Sean, you, I'm used to seeing like, hey, you need to zip it. That's 15,000, or that's 8,000, or that's 25,000 for calling out the officials.
I'm definitely surprised. I mean, I get there's an aspect of like he has a reason to be complaining. You're releasing these last 2-minute reports that clearly show you're getting gypped in these games. But I thought the extent of how Mike approached it, I definitely was expecting a fine. For him to come out and say, I think maybe it's just because we're the Sacramento Kings and they expect us to lose. Like, that's the Miami Heat on the other end. Like, I am definitely surprised, because Mike was very blunt in the way that he went about it. And I understand.
Herder literally said, like, I know what you're saying about Mike Brown. Herder literally said that he's played in other cities, and it feels different that you don't get calls here in Sacramento. Go ahead.
Oh, yeah, and just to that point, like, that's what surprises me on why there hasn't been a fine. Again, I understand that there's reasons to be upset, and the NBA confirms that there were missed calls, but I definitely expected a fine. But you two would have better insight on that with how long you've covered the league.
I just think it's a way the way he's done it. It's been respectful. It hasn't been over the top. He hasn't berated an official out on the floor. Like, I'm just thinking of Michael Malone when he was a Kings coach and he went up there and, called an official a coward, like an effing coward, several times before he walked off the floor after being ejected. Or actually, I'm sorry, he wasn't ejected, but it was at the end of the game where a call didn't go their way. Anyway, yeah, I just think Mike Brown has done it with in a very eloquent way to not only show that his team was on the receiving end of a screw job, but that he's not lambasting them. He's not just totally going berserk on them, and he's not using harsh language. And I think his players have done a pretty good job at it as well. Even on social media, Kevin Herter didn't talk about it, but he goes on there and talks about it, talks about the next day, and I thought he kind of beat around the bush pretty well and did it in a way. It's like, yeah, this is unfair. It hasn't really gone our way, blah, blah, blah. But it's also warranted, because these calls you were right. Everything that you were talking about ended up being the way it was with the 2-minute report. I feel like, yeah, in years past, James, you would even mention the officials. I've seen guys tee off on officials before and not get fined, to be honest. Some of that is, well, you're Sacramento. Like, maybe the noise of you roasting an official isn't as loud as if you are in a different city. Okay, but we've seen guys get certainly fined for less. So I think also throughout the course of a season and even a player's career, like, I'll use DeMarcus Cousins as an example. You had a different person then at that point. It was Kiki Vandeweghe who kind of headed that up, but it's still a collective group of people that do this. I think you can have conversations with people, and you've had enough conversations, enough warnings to where all of a sudden here comes a fine, here comes some sort of punishment. And with other guys, it's you can get your message across. And if it's constant beratement, like if even if it is a short call again, and then you come out and you try to roast the officials again, maybe this one results in a fine. I just think that they're giving him a longer leash based off of the way that they've handled it, which I think has been the right way, and I think the organization has done a pretty decent job in trying to point these out to the officials as well and to the league, and plead for them to give them a fair shot like they do other teams. It shouldn't be the superstar calls versus the regular average Joe's kind of calls. So they'll clean it up, but I'm not surprised. I'm not totally surprised. I think that right now, because by virtue of the way they've handled it and the way they've addressed certain things, they haven't come out and been disrespectful. So I think there's a way to do it without being disrespectful, and that's the way they've done it.
Okay. I also think it helps that the Kings don't have a player who's known for saying things, they don't have DeMarcus Cousins. Like, just to be honest,
well, if they had like Draymond Green on the team or something like that, I think they would do a good job of saying, "Hey, don't talk about the officials. Let somebody else do that. Let Steve Kerr do that. Let Steph do it."
It just feels like so many other times it's been like, "Hey, man, like I don't want to. We have to ask a follow-up question, and I know I'm gonna like get you fined, but I'm gonna ask a follow-up question anyways." It doesn't feel like we have to do that because for some reason they're just not drawing the fine. Okay, let's wrap this thing up. Brenden, do you have any final thoughts? You're moving. Your car's still trashed. Taco Bell runs are much more difficult. You're at least it doesn't look like you're being held hostage this one. Although I do kind of like that shirt you're wearing. But
I was going to say, Brenden, can we see that tie that's behind your computer monitor up there? Because it's all by its lonesome, and that's
called a double Windsor, Sean. I know
this
you
would
don't
be a
wear
friend
ties.
of mine's actually. This is not.
Okay. What an ugly tie! What is that? It is so trash.
I could.
Don't tell your friend.
I've never seen him wear it. It's probably been hanging there. I think there's dust coming off of it right now.
Oh my god.
Well, clearly somebody tied a double Windsor for him, and he's left it that way because he doesn't probably know how to keep going back and forth with it. But it's
exactly what's going on.
It's a good look.
Okay,
Okay, final thoughts,
any
Brenden.
Final thoughts. Like you said, I'm moving today. No, right after this, I'm about to get started on my move. I'm excited to be in my new place. So that's my final thought.
Excellent. Sean, final thoughts?
Well, I thought Brenden was going to talk about Stockton. That was viewpoints from the Stockton Kings. It was a mess.
Oh, the team wasn't good?
Well, they've got a lot of injuries, and then the stats system completely crashed, which is, I think, the Kings... I will say I've been to Stockton quite a bit, and that's the third time I can remember that happening. So there was a lengthy delay based off of the clock and stats
Avery.
and all that kind
of stuff. It's all Avery's fault.
Oh, that's not fair. And then, I mean, Frank Jackson looked really good for Salt Lake Stars. We got to see Agbaji. That was kind of fun. O'Shea Agbaji.
Yeah.
And
Balmero.
Yeah. Oh, Balmero looked really good. Yeah, for Salt Lake City. So
he's been hiding out. I forgot he was still around.
Yeah. There's some good stuff. Go down and support the Stockton Kings. My final thoughts. Before the game, I had a kind of a odd assignment. It was really fun to catch up with a guy that his I'd never met before, but he's got a lot of ties to the area, especially up in James Ham's neck of the woods.
Oh, yeah.
And Mr. Ricky Williams was in town. He's into the cannabis stuff. And so we did a story.
He is?
I know, shocker. This is gonna throw some of you for a loop.
You don't say, Sean.
He's into that wacky tobacco, and he's got he's got his own strain. And in Dixon, they were selling it. It's called, of all things, Heisman. Higsman. See what they did there? Yeah. So if you're into that kind of thing, go check him out. He was up in Grass Valley for a long time when he was suspended and retired from the NFL. So dude, I'm telling you, talking to that guy is really interesting.
He's really bright, right?
He is.
And really mellow, clearly. Yeah.
Yeah.
He lived in Grass Valley for a while. He also lived up in Ananda, which is like above Grass Valley, Nevada City, like on North San Juan. Here in Grass Valley, we call it the Ridge. Up on the ridge, and there's a lot of Ananda is a I don't want to just call them a cult, but kind of a ashram. Like there's some stuff that it's kind of different. But really nice people, and I think he was up there for a while, and And good. I'm glad to see that he's doing well, and it really does kind of fit him to be in that industry, because that's what, like, basically his battle with the NFL was. So yeah.
Well, and it's just funny because, like, the longer we do this, for the record, despite what most people think about me, probably I'm not into cannabis. I don't do that, but I certainly see the benefit. I love the destigmatization of cannabis lately, and I've really had a fun time seeing how athletes who are really starting businesses around it. And for him, it's like, okay, no brainer, right? Like Ricky Williams being involved in cannabis is something we'd all expect, but like he's really like the pioneer of it in a way, for an athlete to try to drop the stigma around marijuana and cannabis for both recreational and medicinal use. Like it's interesting. But the longer I do this job, it's like the people we come across, and it's like I didn't think I'd be meeting with Ricky Williams, a former Heisman Trophy winner and an NFL star, in Dixon of all places, at a dispensary right by a Popeye's chicken, like right off of, like, what are we doing? And it's
that makes sense. Yeah, but that's a good spot to drop in a dispensary.
James likes to mention that, like, I have Forrest Gump like travels, and my Paris Hilton story, or different people I've encountered in my life or whatever. But it's like Ricky Williams is probably up there as, like, I don't know how that happened. I don't know that I would have ever done that story, and it was, I don't know, it was kind of fun. So welcome to Cannabis Talk.
Interesting. Cannabis. I know Omri Caspi, and I think Chris Webber was involved too.
Chris Webber, Brad Miller, Matt Barnes. Yeah, you've got a whole line of former
Omri's
Kings.
was like a spray, almost like a Banaka spray that was CBD oil. You could just, like, a mouth spray. I don't know. Like,
does it make your breath better?
Yeah, I think it was. Like, it was supposed to make your breath better, and as
whatever
well
happened
as,
to Banaka? Is that still a thing, or do people just say, you know what, I'm just going to brush my teeth, floss, and use mouthwash more
I have
regularly?
no clue what that is.
Banaka was like a little tiny breath spray that it was almost like a little tiny aerosol, and just like
This
your breath.
This is the first time I've been like, oh, you lovable dullard, I'm so glad you don't know what something is. No one needs to know what Banaka is. It should never have been a thing to begin with.
That's
good job,
hilarious.
Brenden.
There we go.
Okay. Are we back? So he's moved in, so can we start to assign him homework assignments again, to movies to watch?
I think we could have had him, like, watching movies and stuff with his friends. I don't know.
Yeah, you might. Silence of the Lambs is still next.
Yeah,
that does still need to be next.
I need to watch that again.
A lot of good things.
Just because a lot of good things. It's not something that there's a lot of good things.
It's a feel good. It's a feel good.
Good things that it's a good movie.
Brenden puts the lotion on his skin,
or he gets the hose again. Yeah. Don't even know that reference, do you?
There's so many great one-liners in that too. Wait a minute. She great big old fat girl. Yeah, there's some lines in that movie.
James. Person.
That's not what he says.
Yeah, big fat person. That's what he said.
Oh no!
You want to bet? I'll bet you.
Yeah, we'll bet. We'll have to go back and watch.
When Starling comes to, you don't want to give it away.
No. Yeah.
James and I have a side bet.
I just lost
a side bet. I won't say what the bet was, but I just lost a side bet to Anthony Slater. I'm very upset about it.
Oh,
it cost me $20.
I saw your side bet. I didn't know what it was about. What it was about.
I'll tell you off air. I can't get into it.
All right, that makes sense. All right, I don't have any final thoughts. There's some talk about it being the 10th year anniversary of when the Kings were saved. It doesn't make any sense to me because it's not when they were saved. It wasn't this time of the year. But it does seem like that's sort of attached to the city jersey. I don't mind the city jersey. I don't know why people are so are freaking out about it. I'm really confused by the CTL, the Charlotte jersey.
The CLT.
The CLT that my good friend...
a lot of jokes around that.
Zach Harper pointed out. Like, that jersey's hard to find.
Elusive.
Elusive. Yes. The elusive jersey. I also...
Use your imagination.
think that the Warriors jersey, like, I know there was intent there that was positive, but it just looks very inappropriate. With a gigantic flower like on the lower half of the jersey. I don't know what's going on there either.
Yeah,
some
that
of these,
doesn't make sense to me.
I think this year's City jersey, someone was having a good time. Someone's having a good time and like laughing behind the scenes, like, oh, let's see if we can get away with this. And certainly they did.
They gave the creator of Milwaukee's Cream City jersey a little more leeway to work on some other teams.
Exactly.
See, I was ready for it, and I was ready for it. The Cream City, yeah, I think it was Trey Kirby who put out there. He thinks that Dallas should go with the big D on there.
Big D.
Right.
For next year. I mean, you can just keep it going. There's all kinds of things.
Oh man. I think we could think of a couple of like, you know.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, we could keep going with this,
Rose
but
City,
that would just get us in trouble. So
Why?
that's gonna do it for this edition.
Hey,
of
happy Veterans Day.
The Kings. Oh yes, happy Veterans Day.
Yeah.
I woke up this morning and my 14-year-old was still here. I'm like, what are you doing here? And my 15-year-old, sorry. And he's like,
Did you expect him to move out and have a job already, or what?
no, I'm like, what are you doing here? And he's like, it's Veterans Day. And I'm like, oh, it is Veterans Day. My bad. Sorry, go back to sleep. I was like, why aren't you at school? All right. So, yes, happy Veterans Day. Hug your veterans. Thank you for all your service, veterans out there.
Hug a veteran. Can you imagine just walking up to somebody on the street giving him a hug? It's assault, James. You could maybe salute a veteran.
Yeah. You know,
It's
Sean may have a
2022,
point.
man.
Sean may have a point.
Maybe ask if you can give him a hug first.
All
Him
right,
or her.
we got to wrap this thing up because we're just going to get ourselves in trouble
Sorry.
here.
It's
That's
my
going to
fault.
do it for this edition of the Kings Beat podcast for Fox 40, Sean Cunningham and Brenden Nunes from the Kings
God.
Pulse podcast.
That's how you hurt your back.
I am James Ham. No, I hurt my back rubbing my dog's. I rubbed my dog's belly. I went to stand up and pop. Done.
Don't pet your dogs, folks.
Damn dog.
Yeah, don't pet your dogs. Don't hug your dogs or any veterans. That's what you learned here on the Kings Beat podcast. I am James Ham,
Ask
Kings
first.
Insider for ESPN 1320 and the Kings Beat. See you next week.